Welcome to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions. Your host tonight is the author of the Pro-Black Compendium and Zuberi and the Maroons of Ma'at, the Pan-African Nationalist, Oni. Oni, what are we discussing tonight?
So what we're going to do is we're going to read Chapter 5 of Unity and Struggle, speeches and writings from Amilcar Cabral. This should be a good chapter. It's titled "To Start Out from Reality of Our Land to Be Realist." Before we get started, though, I want to remind you guys that I'm part of a podcasting network called KWAZ Radio. So be sure to check out the other shows. And by the way, don't forget that later today, maybe in like 6 hours, there's going to be Shoot the Breeze. Make sure you guys check out Shoot the Breeze. It's been really good recently, so I want you guys to check it out. But in the meantime, I just want to remind you about the network.
Hello there, dear listener. We hope you're enjoying this lovely discussion. If you're not already aware, this show is part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio, a Pan-African Nationalist and Garveyite network committed to showcasing the rich and varied thoughts of African people. We have an exciting lineup of shows that we think you'll enjoy, including
the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
I think Black people acquire too much buy-in. Like, we constantly have to sell Black people on things that are beneficial to Black people.
The Pro-Black Perspective Podcast.
I'm fearful that our people are not really studying how to get ahead, and we're kind of, continually staying behind.
The Harsh Reality Podcast.
To me, it don't matter. I think people are so dumbed down, it wouldn't matter what you reveal to them. They still are in the matrix. They're in the simulation. They're going to keep doing what they did. They lemmings. So to me, it don't matter, man.
The Learning Curve Podcast.
Sexual access has never given you economic empowerment. The only person who has ever been economically empowered by a sexual relationship is the wasp and his woman.
The Cathedra Cheek Show.
When we start rising up to fight for our own, I guarantee you they'll stop doing what they're doing. I guarantee you they would have let their brother go. They was waiting to see what Black folks was going to do.
Brother Bakari Podcast.
Black people love to claim folks that hate them, right? They're a slave master, and they are ashamed of who they really are.
The Forecast Radio.
Like, if you pray to the same deity as like your enemy, and that God blesses your enemy more than you may want to reconsider who you praying to,
And Tanzan, African Mind.
Africans generally are welcoming of everyone. Sometimes, to my consternation, I think that they should be less, welcoming.
If you love our podcast network, we would be grateful if you could rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on social media, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check out our website at www.kwazradio.com for more information. Thank you for tuning in. And now, back to the program.
All right. I see Brother Bakari's in the chats. Peace to Brother Bakari. We're going to get into this book. This is one of those books that you're supposed to read at least once. Well, not really. Like I said, everybody's free to do what they want. What I want to do, though, is I want to read this book. Amilcar Cabral was one of the top leaders in Africa at one point. He was also obviously a socialist, but he was a liberation fighter as well. So it's worth studying the people who set the foundation for our independence, our independence. So I'm just going to get into it. Unity and Struggle. And I'm sitting down. I'm chill. Usually I stand up, but I'm just going to chill. We're going to chillax and just have a good read. So to start out from the reality of our land, to be realist, the reality. Another question we can proceed to discuss in the following principle. You know what? Let me zoom in, come to think of it. I'm like struggling to see this. Let's just zoom in a little bit, guys. To 200%. Zoom in some more. That's a good one. All right. Another question we can proceed to discuss in the following principle of our party. We advance towards the struggle securing the reality of our land with our feet planted on the ground. This means, as we see it, that it is impossible to wage a struggle under our conditions. It is impossible to struggle effectively for the independence of a people. It is impossible to establish effective armed struggle such as we have to establish in our land unless we really know our reality and unless we really start out from that reality to wage the struggle. What is our reality? Our reality, so basically it's like, look, you can't struggle for land unless you know your reality. So what is our reality? Our reality, like all other realities, has positive aspects and negative aspects, has strengths and weaknesses, right? Wherever our head might be, our feet are planted on the ground in our land of Guinea and Cape Verde, in the specific reality of our land. This is the key factor that could guide the work of our party. So this is actually pretty interesting. It's like wherever your head may be, where are your feet? Okay? And that's how I'm living right now. Just to FYI, it's like my head is in Africa. My feet are in America. That's backwards. Your feet should be in Africa. Okay, your head should be in Africa too, but your feet should be in Africa. If you're trying to accomplish things in Africa, there are those in the world who take the view that reality depends on the way in which man interprets it. For such, reality, things seen, touched, felt, the world around each human being are the consequent of what man has in his head. There are others who take the view that reality exists and that man forms part of reality. It is not what he has in his head that defines reality, but reality itself that defines man. Man is part of reality. Man is within reality and is not what he has in his head that defines reality. On the contrary, reality itself under which the man lives is what defines the thing man has in his head. So he's like, look, there's different philosophies. One is reality is in your what you think of in your head, right? The other one is, hey, reality is just this thing outside of us and we're just experiencing a part of it, right? And the last one is, no, reality is where you are. Reality is where you are. And I think that's a fundamental message. Like, it's a fundamental message. I'm really disappointed that this is not even a more widespread view. Like, I'm really disappointed that it's not a more widespread view. Let me just check the chat. Okay, so it's just so you may ask, what is our position in PAIGC in respect to these two views? Our view is the following: man is part of reality. Reality exists. Reality exists. He's got a independent of man's will. To the extent to which he acquires consciousness of reality, to the extent to which reality influences his consciousness or creates his consciousness, man can acquire the potential to transform reality little by little. This is our view. Let us say the principle of our party on relations between man and reality. A very important aspect of the national liberation struggle is that those who lead the struggle must never confuse what they have in their head with reality. On the contrary, I think this might be one of those famous quotes, actually. On the contrary, anyone who leads a national liberation struggle must have many things in his head, and more each day, from the starting point of the particular reality of his land and of the reality of others' lands. But he must weigh up and make plans which respect reality and not what he has in his head. This is very important. Failure to respect it has created many difficulties in the people's liberation struggle, mainly in Africa. So there's this, I think it's Amilcar Cabral now. I don't remember, but I think it's between him and Sankofa, but I think it's Cabral, who says, remember that people are not fighting for the ideas in your head. They are fighting to improve their reality, right? And so you have this dichotomy between fantasy and reality. That's what I call fantasy and reality. And what Cabral is saying is, look, reality exists, okay? And there's fantasy. And you should not get caught up in fantasy, okay? If anything, get caught up in reality. That's a really critical paragraph. I think I'll reread it just to emphasize It's just a very important aspect of national liberation struggle is that those who lead the struggle must never confuse what they have in their head with reality. Never confuse fantasy with reality. On the contrary, anyone who leads or ideality, there's ideality and reality, right? On the contrary, anyone who leads a national liberation struggle must have many things in their head. They must have fantasies. They must have ideality, and more each day from the starting point of the particular reality of his land and of the reality of other lands. But he must weigh, and they must have reality in their head too. And he must weigh up and make plans with respect to reality and not what he has in his head. This is very important. Failing to respect it has created many difficulties in the people's liberation struggle, mainly in Africa. That was good. That was good. Let's keep going. I may have my own opinion on various matters, on the way to organize the struggle, to organize a party, an opinion I formed, for example, in Europe, in Asia, or even perhaps in other African countries, from books and documents I have read, or because of someone who influenced me. But I cannot presume to organize a party, to organize a struggle in accordance with what I have in my head. I must be in accordance with the specific reality of the land. You see, this realism is something that's lacking in African circles. Really. We can give many examples. Obviously, we cannot presume, for example, to organize our party on the lines of parties in France or any other country in Europe or even in Asia using the same form of party. We began a little like that, but gradually we had to change to adapt to the specific realities of our land. A further example, at the start of our struggle, we were convinced that if we were to mobilize the workers in Bissau, Bolama and Bafata to go on strike, to demonstrate in the streets, to challenge the administration, the Portuguese would change and would grant us independence. But it is not true. In the first place, the workers in our land do not have the same strength as in other lands. Their strength is not so great from the economic point of view because the great economic strength in our land lies basically in the countryside. But it was almost impossible to have strikes in the countryside, given the conditions of our people's political situation, political awareness, and even their immediate interests. It was impossible to ask our people to halt cultivation of those items the colonialists were exploiting. Moreover, the Portuguese, our colonialist enemies, are not like us who show a measure of respect for certain things. The Portuguese responded to strikes and demonstrations by falling upon us to kill everyone, to finish everything off. You see, again, so this is it. So you see, he's like, look, I learned about socialist, labor strikes, labor unions, and then the proletariat strikes, right? Worker strikes. We learn about worker strikes. Can you do that in an agrarian culture? No, because the people who have the plots of land for harvesting cotton or harvesting cacao plants, right? Things that they can't consume themselves, tobacco, they can't consume themselves. They say, okay, let me stop doing that. They were doing that for money. Right? And so you're going to them and saying, hey, no longer do that, because then the Portuguese, they don't respond with, okay, well, let's see what are your demands. They say, okay, we'll fucking kill you. And you can't just, go by the book. You have to go by the situation on the ground. I like that. This is good. So we had to adapt our struggle to different conditions, to our land, and could not do as we have done in other lands. No, it not do as was done in other lands. And many other things show clearly that it's essential to bear in mind the specific reality of the land in waging the struggle. Even in the question of mobilization and training, etc., we had to look at the problem one way in Guinea and another way in Cape Verde, because in the case of Guinea, we can be temporarily in the Republic of Guinea or in Senegal, coming and going. For Cape Verde, it is already more difficult because it lies in the middle of the sea. We had to devise another procedure to give better security to the struggle so that there should not be the need of much toing and froing. And in the evolution of the struggle later on, when we shall begin armed struggle in Cape Verde, it had to be armed struggle waged a little differently from that in Guinea, because we cannot face the difficulties as, for example, in 1962 in our land. Our comrades were in great danger in the bush. We did not yet have weapons, and we gave orders for all the cadres to leave, and more than 200 cadres went out to avoid serious calamity. Later we went in again, and we advanced with the struggle. In Cape Verde, we cannot do this, cannot pull many folk out rapidly. So he's talking military tactics, which is, again, why I like Amilcar and Cabral, because he's not just, we're going to get liberation if we just talk about it. He's about it. He has 200 cadres. So I don't know if you guys know what a cadre is, but a cadre is a unit. Okay? Well, I'm not 100% sure. I'm thinking it's a unit, right? I'm pretty certain it's a unit. So let's say a comrade is a person, right? And a cadre is a group of people. So 200 groups of people. That is that's a formidable force. That's a bigger force than most can command. And so the fact that he's commanding this on the tiny island of Cape Verde as well as Guinea is pretty impressive. But anyway, let's continue. And by the way, guys, you can hit the like button or put some comments, so it's not just pure reading. Right? We have to consider in each specific case the specific reality. Even in Guinea, for example, we made a serious mistake in our analysis before the struggle. We had given a fair amount of attention to the living conditions of the Balanta people, the Fula, the Mandinga, the Pepo, and their attitude to the struggle. We had given attention to the petty bourgeoisie, salaried workers, shop staff, port workers, and their attitude to the struggle, descendants of the Cape Verdeans and their attitude to the struggle. We had given attention to all this, but we made a serious mistake, namely that we did not really take into consideration the position of the traditional chiefs of the notables, Fula, Manjenko, above all those two. We did not really take them into consideration because we started out from the following principle. They, their forebears, had earlier struggled against the Portuguese and were defeated. So they must have the will to struggle once again. It was an error. We were mistaken. So he's saying, look, we didn't even talk to the traditional chiefs because we thought, hey, look, you guys lost to the Portuguese, so you want to fight the Portuguese now. No, they don't. You see what I'm saying? And that's actually profound. But all right, we'll continue. We must consider that we were learning how to weigh struggle in steps as we were advancing on the path. The struggle on the coastline of our land is one thing. Among the Manjaco, it is another. In Ohio, it has to be different again. There are many differences. Take, for example, the Mandinga elders. We have to understand the way to deal with them, not the same way as we treat the Balanta elders. But in Gabu, we had to wage the struggle in a completely different way. If we compare the struggle in Gabu with the struggle in the south of our land, there are two struggles as if it were a matter of two different lands. So, and this is, I mean, I know I shouldn't stop so often, but, it is what it is, right? What I want you guys to realize is this, though, because, we're not just reading to read and, just blah, blah, blah. We're reading to better our own selves, right? And one of the things that I'm picking up here is Mandinga, like we tend to be like, oh, this is an African elder. This is an African elder. It's not the same. Mandinga elder is different from Balanta elder, different from a Gabu elder, different from a Southerner elder. Just the same, like an African American elder, you shouldn't even say that. Just like a New York African American elder is different from a Texan African American elder, different from a Chicago. You get what I'm saying. The point being that how you engage them, you're supposed to modify it. Not just in America, but even the same as Jamaica, or not even. And again, I'm not trying to make it just Jamaica. I'm trying to say that even the subcategories of Jamaica, as to say, for Jamaica, you might say Kingston or Clarendon. An elder in Clarendon versus an elder in Kingston, or in Haiti, a Port-au-Prince versus, wherever else, right? Point being that this is what he's saying. Hey, look, some people, like how you interact with your elders really, or how you interact with people really depends upon their own background, right? And it's not a one size fits all. It's not they're all African, so it is what it is. It's well, let's look into it. You know what I mean? Realism is essential. And I'm not saying that there's not a general pattern that you can approach people with, but there also are cultural differences in the sense of, let's say, like you might go to one elder. Like, for instance, let's say I become an elder, right? If you appreciate beautiful women, I might be like, yeah, I got you. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe I might say, if you come into my place and you appreciate beautiful women, I might be like, what the fuck is wrong with you? Stay focused. You know what I mean? Like it really, it almost really depends upon the individual. But of course, the individual follows a certain cultural context, a cultural pattern that is not necessarily unique to them, but is contextualized to them. So how people will look at you differently depending on your approach, and all that kind of stuff. For instance, I could tell you guys, I'll just leave it at that. Let's see. let's keep going. So the text goes, realism is essential to consider the specific reality, even in respect of certain things which are gradually advancing. At the start, the men did not want meetings with women. See, that's another thing that I picked up on, right? At the start, the men did not want meetings with women. We did not force the pace. While in some areas, women soon came to the meetings without difficulties. We must be aware of reality, not only of the general reality of our land, but also the particular realities of everything, so as to be able to guide the struggle correctly. It is only the responsible officials or leaders who take the sense of reality into consideration, who do not think that truth is what they have in their head, but the truth is what is outside their head. We can properly guide their work as the work of a political commissar may be very good. In Asara, let us imagine. But if the political work is not good in Ohio, in Bayambi, or in the Bafata area, the work in Sarah does not take us very far. A unit of our army in Kanchongo or the Unchada area, let us imagine, can be struggling quite well, attacking the Portuguese every day. Y'all know I got my motto. Anyway, I think it might have been a spam call, honestly. But anyway, let us imagine, but if the political work is not good in Ohio, let me just actually mute my phone call. Bayambi or the Bafata area, the work in Sara does not take us very far. A unit of our army in Kanchungo or the Ankara area, let us imagine, can be struggling quite well, attacking the Portuguese every day. But if the other areas, oh, you see that? Look, a unit of our army, they had an army, let us imagine, can be struggling quite well, attacking the Portuguese every day. But if in other areas, other units of our army are not struggling quite well, the sacrifice and the victories of Enchada or Conchungo do not have their due value. But we are faced with still more. If the struggle in Guinea were to go well forward, but the struggle in Cape Verde did not go forward at all, sooner or later we would seriously prejudice the struggle in Guinea. It suffices to mention the following from the strategic point of view. There can be no peace in Guinea if the Portuguese have air bases in Cape Verde. It is impossible. If we were to liberate Guinea together, totally, for example, the Portuguese could bombard us with air bases installed in Cape Verde. They could procure many more aircraft in South Africa, which has an interest in Cape Verde, can supply them on the grand scale. We have to study the potential for taking the two realities forward simultaneously as a joint reality, as a single reality. So they're talking about attacking air bases. And I'm saying, like when you talk about revolution, like I pointed it out on Twitter. I said, look, the only population in the Western Hemisphere that can tell me about revolution is the Haitians. Because revolution is about killing politicians. But not just killing politicians, obviously, because look at this. He's talking about attacking air bases. Like this is the real kind of revolutionary rhetoric. And then, what we get is, man, this basketball player should marry one of these women. I don't give a fuck about no basketball player's marriage. But it is what it is. Let's keep going. But if we in Guinea and Cape Verde were to struggle hard, and the peoples of Angola and Mozambique did not struggle at all, and if perhaps the Portuguese could withdraw all their troops from Angola, Mozambique, and send them to our land, I do not know when we would win our independence, as the Portuguese would stay on in all our villages. They would be so numerous that they could occupy all the villages and cultivate the rice. We are seeing, therefore, the reality of our struggle forms part of the struggle of the Portuguese colonies, whether we like it or not. It is not a question of wishing. It was not I who decided this, nor the political bureau of the party, nor any of you who decided it. Whether we like it or not, it is so. This is the strength of reality. To sum up, we must be aware of this, must work so that we can follow the path together as it should be. It is the only explanation of the policy of our party. The commitment of our party to CONCP, that is the group of movements in the Portuguese colonies in their entirety, because we know what the reality is. We can have a strong influence on the creation of Frelimo, the Mozambique movement, because it was essential and urgent to struggle in Mozambique, but we might struggle in all the Portuguese colonies, even to the point of winning our independence. And if racism were to continue in South Africa, with the colonialists still ruling, directly or indirectly, in many African lands, we could not have the confidence in real independence in Africa. Sooner or later, calamity would strike again. So we form part of a specific reality, namely Africa struggling against imperialism, against racism, and against colonialism. If we do not bear this in mind, we could make many mistakes. It is the same thing for our land facing the Republic of Guinea and Senegal, with Cape Verde before them in the middle of the sea, and in turn Cape Verde facing Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea. We constitute a whole. So I'm actually a little confused. Is even the? What did I do? I gotta zoom out because I'm mad confused. Did I skip a whole page? Or 2 pages? Like, what the fuck? Hold on a second. I feel like I might have skipped some pages. Yeah, hold on a second. Did I read this? Okay, so I think I might have skipped some pages. All right. I'm like, wait a second, because I'm like, I zoomed in, and then I might have just been scrolling down. Coming Cape Verde is more difficult. Later we went. Yeah, I think I might have. Did I skip this page? I think so. So it's a little embarrassing, but it is what it is. It's not like it really matters. Reality exists. So I'm just gonna keep the page this zoomed out. Well, maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more, but nah, I'll just zoom out. That's a little embarrassing. All right. Independently of man's will, to this extent to which he acquires consciousness of reality, to the extent to which reality influences conscious. No, I think I read this page. Yeah, I think I read this page. Did I read this one? Militants is responsible. So I don't think I read this one. Even in respect of. Did I read this? We have considered in specific cases through reality. There's a serious mistake in our analysis. Yeah, I think I read this. Did I? And I think I just read this. Yeah, I just read that. So I didn't read this. I skipped this one, I think. This means that our reality is the center of a complex reality, but is... Yeah, so I think I skipped this page. All right, sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. Militants as responsible officials in the struggle like ours. Unhappily, we must acknowledge that many comrades have taken on responsibility in the struggle without considering this factor, although we have always spoken about it. But reality never exists in isolation. For example, our comrade Manuel Nandinga is... reality is a real fact, but he cannot exist alone. He alone is nothing. A reality is never isolated from other realities. No matter what reality we consider in the world or in life, however great or small, it is always forms parts of another reality. It's integrated in another reality, is affected by other realities, which in turn have an effect in or on other realities. So our land of Guinea and Cape Verde and our struggle form part of a greater reality that is affected by and affects other realities in the world. For example, if we consider the reality of Guinea and the reality of Cape Verde, immediately there is a greater reality, Guinea and Cape Verde, but the latter reality is within the reality of West Africa, with our 2 closest neighboring countries. We can look at it a little wider, with our 2 neighboring countries first, then with West Africa, and with the reality of the whole of Africa, and with the reality of the world. Although there might be other realities between these. That means that our own reality is the center of a complex reality, but it is the former that must concerns us. For others, it would not be the same. It would be some other focus, and theirs would be the central reality. But even if we think of ours as the center, our reality is not isolated, it's not on its own. In many of these things we have to do, we have first to realize that we are integrated with other realities. This is very important for us to not make mistakes. So this is pretty instrumental when it comes to just understanding what Pan-Africanism is about. It's not to say, hey, look, you're not unique in Cape Verde and Guinea. It's to say that your reality in Cape Verde or your reality in Guinea is connected to West Africa or Western Africa. And your reality in Western Africa is connected to the whole of Africa. And really, your reality of the west of whole Africa is connected to the fucking world. And in that sense, it's even connected to the solar system. You know? And obviously this is a little bit on the sci-fi tip, but if something were to threaten the solar system, right? If something were to threaten the solar system, it would threaten you. Okay? Like it would threaten you. And so you'd have to deal with a threat that was of solar or of solar system proportions. But obviously there's no threat, as far as I know, and no threat that you could deal with. But this is the reality, that there is, that you exist in a context of continents at war. You know, you exist in that context. And because you exist in that context, that's why we talk Pan-Africanism. But let's keep going. Let us imagine the position of a unit of our army at some point. It can never operate as if it were an isolated reality, but has always to operate as interested in the PIGC army, integrated into the struggle of the people of Guinea and Cape Verde. If it operates like this, it is operating correctly. If it does not operate like this, it is operating badly. A political commissar in Kinara, for example, or somewhere else, says Shao, for example, has always to operate as integrated in Kinara, but not only in Kinara, in the south and in the whole of the south, and not only there in the whole of Guinea, and not only there in Guinea and Cape Verde together. We must at all times see the part and the whole. Only in this way can we operate correctly. Unhappily, the tendency of many comrades is to treat their reality as the only reality and forgetting the rest, to such an extent that we can find, for example, comrades in a given area who knows that the comrades in another area do not have any ammunition, and the former are not able to mobilize their folk to deliver ammunition. This shows our failure of awareness in seeing our own reality and how we are integrated in the greater reality that we ourselves have created but not yet fully absorbed into our awareness. Furthermore, we must bear in mind that the reality of others within our land, right? So then he talks about how if you're good on one front, that's not enough for the other front, and we just read that. And so we got a little more context for that. But let's keep going. Whose parts are interdependent. For example, our struggle depends heavily on the Republic of Guinea and on Senegal. From the start, we realized how important the Republic of Guinea and Senegal were for us. We guided our whole struggle in the direction of going forward with them in creating favorable conditions to take advantage of the consequences of this reality. But we must be aware of the following. Both the Republic of Guinea and Senegal are aware that our reality is also important for their reality, and on this awareness depends whether they may give more or less aid. For each of us must think, who will rule the land tomorrow? Is this to our advantage or against our interests? It is all one question, but the Portuguese, too, have a clear conception of this. Just a few days ago, I went to Mauritania. All the radio stations of the world reported that I had talks with President Oloud Dada and that I was very cordially received, etc. Immediately, the Portuguese unleashed a campaign on their radio station, and South Africa, for its part, also unleashed a campaign to the effect that I went to Mauritania to establish a base for an attack on Cape Verde. And they had been saying for a long time that our aim is to damage the Atlantic Treaty. So you see how all the realities are related. But all of us in Africa form part of one reality in the world which has all the difficulties with which you are familiar. Whether we like it or not, we are involved in these difficulties. Today, man walks on the moon, collecting pieces of the moon soil to bring back to Earth. It might seem that this has nothing to do with us, the sons of Guinea and Cape Verde. We still have our feet in the mud to drive the Portuguese from our lands, but the moonwalk is of great importance for our cause tomorrow. And if we are not in this difficult struggle, we ought to hold a great celebration of the fact that man has reached the moon. This is a great significance for the future of mankind, of our land, of this planet where we live. Now, I don't know. I mean, I guess, right? The reality of others, therefore, concerns us. The reality of their others, therefore, concerns us. The experience of others, too. If I knew that one of you went out along a given path, was tripped on all sides and bruised and arrived badly hurt, and then I had to go along the same path, I should have to be careful. Someone already knows the reality of this path, and I know of his experience. If there were another better path, I would try to follow it. But if there was not, then I would have to feel my way with all the cares possible, crawling on the ground if need be. The experience of others is highly significant for someone undergoing any experience. The reality of others is highly significant for each one's reality. Many folk do not understand this and grasp their reality with the passion that they are going to invent everything. I do not want to do the same as others have done, nothing that others have done. This is a sign of great ignorance. So he's like, look, you gotta copy some people. This is a side of great ignorance. If we want to do something in reality, we must see who has already done the same, who has done something similar, and who has done something opposite, so that we can learn something from their experience. It is not to copy completely, because every reality has its own questions and its own answers for these questions. So he's like, look, you can copy other people, but don't copy them completely. And this is what I like. I don't know if you guys remember last worship. So every Sunday I do a worship. It's just a random hodgepodge of topics. But last worship, I looked at the Ugandan law that was recently signed in. I'm talking about this in this is like May 2023 or something like that, right? And the Ugandan law is like, hey, look, we're not welcoming to the LGBT movement that's happening in America, right? And that's what it is. It's like America has showed us what can happen if they legalize homosexual marriage, let's say, or dissexual marriage. So they legalized the sexual marriage, and 10 years later, they have men in drag teaching their children how to dance like a drag star. So basically, men dressed like women teaching their children how to dance like a man who dresses like a woman who dances for other men, right? And these are like children, like 7, 8 years old, right? So Uganda says, look, you know what? I see what you've done. I don't want to do it. And then they're going to go their own path, right? They say, hey, look, we know what we like, and this is not what we like. And that's respectable by my book. That's respectable by my book. And so what Cabral is also saying is, look, other people have experiences. They do things. They pass laws. Right now there's a country in Europe who that has a law where I think heroin is legal. Heroin, the hard drug, where you could just buy it at the store and just take it, whatever, right? And they're experimenting with that. And so in 10 years, you could probably see what effects it might have on the country. And you could say to yourself, as a different country, say, you know what? I don't think I want heroin to be legal. Or I see how they did their legality of heroin, but I will do it differently. Whatever it may be. That's the choice you have with autonomy. And what is of great intelligence is to look around the world and say, what did they do? You don't have to necessarily invent new things. You can learn from other people's experiences. And it's actually kind of a scientific way of looking at things. But anyway, so that said, let's look into the comments, and we see the broom. There's too many to handle, huh? But there are many things which belong to many realities jointly. It is essential that the experience of others benefits us. We must be able to derive from everyone's experience what we can adapt to our conditions to avoid unnecessary efforts and sacrifice. This is very important. Obviously, it's the same thing with our struggle. A good political commissar is working, for example, and another political commissar is by his side. But the latter does not take an interest in the work of the former, does not try to learn from his experience, does not try to understand why the other is working well. He turns his back and goes off alone to do his work. A commander is in an area, other commanders, even if lower ranked than his, are in the same area, but the latter are not able to exchange views with the former, not able to ask him how to solve certain difficulties on the basis of his greater experience, his longer service in the struggle. They do not want to know. These men are destroying the struggle. Obviously, if a struggle like ours, it is essential to link reality with the development of the struggle. Yesterday, we spoke a fair amount about certain contradictions on the social plane of our land, both in Guinea and in Cape Verde. So he's like, look, you got to learn from people. Like, always be open to learning, right? So for us to develop our struggle, we must examine the geographic realities of our land, the geographical reality of our lands, as historic reality, the ethnic reality, and that is of races and cultures, and the cultural, social, and economic reality. All of this is incorporated in the greater reality of our land and struggle, which is the political reality. Namely, we are under Portuguese colonial domination in Guinea and Cape Verde. So you see, he's going to be talking about the geographical reality, but eventually even the ethnic reality. So I'm going to be interested for that. You guys can tell me if you're interested as well. I don't know, put a 1 in the chat or something, I don't know, right? Geographical reality. We know in broad terms the geographical reality of our land. We are a tiny territory of about 40,000 square kilometers, counting Guinea and Cape Verde, with Guinea 9 times the size of Cape Verde, 10 islands on the west coast of Africa, as an enclave between 2 African countries, the Republic of Guinea and the Senegal, and Cape Verde, about 400 miles offshore. So He's telling you where Cape Verde is and all that, right? Next to Senegal. So our reality, and by the way, Senegal is where Jollof, the city of Jollof is. And if you guys know where the city of Jollof is famous for, one of the famous things is the rice dish called Jollof. All right, so our reality is that we have one part of a mainland and one part insular islands comprising the Bijagos Islets and the Cape Verde Islands, making in all more than 100 islands and islets. Even today, many folk have not perhaps taken in the significance of this has but in the highly significant in all aspects of our land, from the deference of our land to the economy, wealth, and strength of our land. Our geographical reality is further that Guinea is in almost its entirety has no mountain, no high point. There are merely some hills in the environs of Boe with a maximum height of 300 meters, and that Cape Verde is made up of volcanic and mountainous islands. Even in this aspect, we see that one complements the other. One land has no mountains, and the other is all mountains. So basically, Guinea is pretty flat. Also of great significance not only for the economy, but also for the social and cultural life that we find in the people's circumstances. In Guinea, the land is cut by tongues of the sea that we call river, but which are at bottom are not rivers. Faram is only a river near Kanjambari. Geba is only a river from Bambadika onwards, and even near Bambadika, the water is sometimes salt. Mansoa is only a river after Mansoa town towards Sara near Karaola. Buba is in no sense a river because until we reach dry land, there is only salt water. Kumbija and Tambali are entirely tongues of the sea, except for the upper reaches with a little bit of fresh water in the rainy season, particularly in the Bendanda River, which draws fresh water from the Balana. The only genuine river in our land is the Korobal. This is a highly significant reality for us because on the one hand, we had many ports through which to enter our land in boats, we can on the other hand see the danger which is present for us. If our land were entirely closed off with all the twists and turns entailed by the struggle, the Portuguese would already have become desperate because their barracks would be without food. But as they have boats and our militants do not attack the boats sufficiently, they can use the tongues of the sea to take food and equipment to their barracks in the interior. So what he's saying is this, so every war comprises people, okay? Every war comprises people. People need to eat. People need to eat. So if you want to win a war, you can starve another people. But you can't necessarily starve another people if they can get an endless supply of food, right? How do you stop people from getting food? Well, you cut off their, what we call in the West supply chains or whatever, right? But you cut off their food lines, right? You cut off their food routes. But if they're going by boat and you cannot attack boats, right, sufficiently, then they will always have food and they could always fight you. What he's saying is that even if you were to close off the land of Guinea, because you cannot close off the sea, you're at a disadvantage, right? But from the economic point of view, for example, it is good and useful to have navigable rivers or tongues of the street. That is from the point of view of the future of our land. For the struggle itself, we can see how important it is for us to bear all these things in mind to develop our struggle. At the start of the struggle, it is very helpful that there are many rivers in our land, many tongues of the sea, many streams, etc. For we isolated ourselves, could always defend ourselves from the Portuguese, cause them difficulties on swampy ground, make them cross rivers, etc. Today, the difficulty is rather more on our side. If Bissau was on the mainland, if there was no island of Bissau, if it were not the Corobal, if the river Mansoa were not on the other side, we had already been inside Bissau. We could fire on Bissau every day as we did in Mansoa, for example, but in respect to geography, geography favors the Portuguese, as the river Buba favors the Portuguese, who make good use of it for their boats. On the Faram, it is the same. You see, therefore, the significance attached to the simple aspect of geographical reality. So he's talking about how even attacking, so I tell you guys, one of the few European books I actually like is Art of War by Machiavelli. And Machiavelli is telling you, hey, look, land is more important than how good your soldiers are. The best soldiers are not as good as good land. And so what happens with the Portuguese, even though they lose, obviously, is that they're positioned in the better location. based off of the river and based off of their technology. So, I'll just continue with that. Anyone who has read books about guerrilla warfare, and that's what you got to appreciate this man, because he's reading books on guerrilla warfare, right? So anyone who has read books about guerrilla warfare will certainly remember the assertion that the major physical feature conducive to guerrilla warfare in the terrain is the mountains. But in Guinea, there are no mountains. If we did not attach importance to our own reality to put it under analysis and draw conclusions on how to operate, we should have said that it is impossible to wage guerrilla warfare in Guinea because there are no mountains. Cape Verde has mountains. This is significant. But what kind of mountains? It is essential to take it into account. And furthermore, that mountains alone do not suffice. It is not the mountains which open fire. The people must be mobilized. In Guinea, we have, for example, the Bijagos Islands. Why is it that we did not start the struggle in the Bijagos Islands, but began on the other side, on dry land? Because of another reality, the economic reality. In Cape Verde, we face a serious difficulty. If Cape Verde were a single island like Cyprus or like Cuba, it would be easier, but there are 10 islands, so we had to consider in which of the islands are we going to start armed struggle if it is going to be effective. The same goes for mobilization. In which island or islands should we be mobilizing? All this is highly relevant. We had the difficulty of communication from when we are to the island, between the islands, etc. All this is a consequence of the geographical reality of our land. So let's continue. Let me just see what the chat's like. The chat is asleep, but it's fine. Like again, this is one of those books you don't necessarily read for the excitement, but you read for the historical value. You read for understanding another person's experience, and this experience, of course, was real revolutionary. So revolution glamorized is interesting. Obviously, it's glamorized, but revolution as this is not glamorized. It's the reality. You're taking over 10 islands in Cape Verde. You're fighting the Portuguese until you win, notwithstanding they have a better position. That is real revolution. That's real revolution. Is it interesting? No. But if that's what, this is what our ancestors did in order for us to be free. And again, it's not necessarily the case that we need to be revolutionaries today, especially, like I said, if you're trying to go to Africa and you want to live in a free country, you have that opportunity. However, it's still of historic value to understand who your ancestors were and what they did. And that's really important. So let's keep going. Especially when they did this, when they kicked ass, when they said it was it's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum. You know what I mean? like that when they did that, when they said that, that's what it is. Let me make sure I can be heard though. Yeah, okay, my mic's working. All right. So another reality we have to consider is economic reality. Our principal economic reality is that we are Portuguese colonies, because when all is said and done, the political situation is a consequence of the economic situation. And that's what I say all the time. Politics is really a consequence of economics. We in Guinea and Cape Verde are a people exploited by Portuguese colonialists. Our labor is exploited by Portuguese colonialists. This is what is significant. This is the economic reality. But are we a developed country? No. We are economically backward with scarcely any development in Guinea or Cape Verde. There is no real industry. Agriculture is backward. Our agriculture belongs to the age of our grandparents. The wealth of our land was drained off above all man's labor. But the Portuguese did nothing to develop any resource in our land. Absolutely nothing. Our ports are worthless. Both in Bissau and in St. Vincent. S. Vicente. They could have made good ports, but they merely made some mooring quays, which are worthless. When we look at Dakar's ports or Conakry's ports, which are both or are good ports, or better still, those of Abidjan and of Lagos in Nigeria, we can see how the French and the British built big ports where 20 or so ships can moor. And then we see how much time the Portuguese wasted in teasing us, tinkering and playing with us. They did nothing for our land, right? So this is just something to remember, that if you're trying to develop your country, make good. Like when we go to Africa and we're talking about nation building, we're talking about making good ports and stuff, right? So anyway, let's go. So that is our economic reality. And for peace or war, we in Guinea and Cape Verde are an economically backward people whose principal means of livelihood is agriculture, tilling the soil for subsistence food, and not always reaching subsistence level, as in Cape Verde, for example. Even in Guinea, in some areas, if there is not much rain, there are always shortages, at least until the fundu is ripe. The Portuguese have been here for so many years, and the situation has remained static, economically backward. We have no real industry to speak of, either in Guinea or Cape Verde. In Guinea, we have a so-called mini plant for pressing oil from rice shelling. This is not a factory. It is no more than a great pestle. We have a mini plant for treating rubber tappings and a small fish meal factory in Bijagos. In Cape Verde, there are 3 fish packing stations where the Portuguese work for as long as they feel like it, fill their pockets with money, close down the factory, and go away to relax. And just to give you some idea of the shamelessness of the Portuguese, I recall, for example, how when I was at secondary school, my mother went to Cape Verde and took a job at the fish packing station because she made nothing from sewing. And do you know how much she earned per hour? 50 cents an hour. If there was a lot of fish, she might work 8 hours a day, earning 4 pesos, escuados. But if fish were scarce and she had to walk a long way to reach the factory, she would work for 1 hour and earn 50 cents. So a backward economy. This is a strong bearing on the war. You see, we are a people who do not have factories. We cannot capture factories from the Portuguese to start manufacturing something. Today we have vast liberated areas. If there were factories there, it would be useful. Perhaps we could make cloth. Perhaps we could make soap or a proper scale. Instead of Comrade Vasco's tiny soap bars, we could manufacture other things if we had mines. Then there would be many more folk wanting to help us, more than those who now help us. Friends and enemies would try to help us if we had mines in operation with the promise of with a lot of bauxite, a lot of petrol. Many of them come rushing. And if the petrol in our land had already begun to be exported, perhaps even Standard Oil would be sympathetic to us against the Portuguese. Perhaps the American government would be sympathetic to us against the Portuguese. So again, it's a good thing the American government was not involved. Because imagine if Portugal was exporting oil towards the American government. Suppose Portugal was exporting oil to the Standard Oil. Then Standard Oil and America would try to stop your revolution. So it's actually not, like, again, go to reality. See, that's the thing. He's going into the fantasy right here. And it's fine. Again, he's communicating to his own people and he's telling them sort of things. But this is the danger here. You see that, well, you're going to see the international community could help us. Because I could see the United Nations just peeking ahead. So it's just like, come on, that's not a good idea. But anyway, we keep going. Perhaps it would even have the courage to say to the Portuguese, either you stop and give independence to Guinea now, or we shall withdraw all our aid to you and attack you in the United Nations. And why? Out of their own interest. But as our land has nothing developed, they think of us as a corridor between the Republic of Guinea and Senegal, a simple passageway. So again, if let's say Portugal could use Guinea to export oil, right? Then America might be involved because America likes a cheap buyer of oil. And if America were involved, it would have been involved with the Portuguese before your revolution. And if so, it would have lent military aid to the Portuguese to keep the oil coming into them. Now, another thing I want to point out is this idea that you need these major factories to manufacture cloth and soap and all that kind of stuff, that's not true. So our ancestors, before we were enslaved, did manufacture our own soaps, our own cloth, our own so on and so forth. That's not, I mean, of course you do want factories for that, but the excuse of, oh, well, we don't have any factories, therefore we can't do that. That's not a good excuse. And we have to really seriously combat that misconception even among our people. And so that's just one of the things I want to point out, because, a lot of us, for instance, we might come across the theme of, well, how Europe underdeveloped Africa or something like that, right? And maybe that might be another book to read, honestly. But that's the issue, not to say that, I mean, of course we had something advanced beforehand, but it's like, we can still do those advanced things we did before. That's what I really want to point out. But anyways, he says, but as I have said, the backwardness of our economy has a bearing on the war situation, and so does our unfamiliarity with our resources. For example, it would be a lot different if our people already had enough experience in iron casting to manufacture weapons. There are people who are struggling, and while some fight at the front, others are making weapons in the rear guard. We cannot do this. We can only make muskets, but muskets are ineffective. If it is only with muskets that we are going to win the war against the Portuguese or against any colonialists, our struggle will be very long indeed. So he's like, look, we can make muskets And that's actually pretty interesting. A lot of us didn't know that, right? That African people can make muskets. But if we had a developed economy, this would mean that our people would also be culturally stronger in the modern perspective, which has more schools, more secondary schools, and be able to handle mortars, artillery, and even aircraft. The commanders would be more capable of understanding all the questions of strategy and tactic and would all know how to read maps. We see, therefore, the significance of having to struggle in an economically backward country. So this is a pretty good thing to tell your people. It's not sarcasm. I'm being honest. This is a good thing to share with people. Social reality. All of you know what the social reality of our land is, the disastrous consequences of colonial exploitation. But let us not put all the blame on the colonialists. There is also exploitation of our folk by our own folk. You saw this. You saw this yesterday when I spoke to you about the social structures of our land. We are in fact exploited by colonialists in our land of Guinea and Cape Verde. And trade in Cape Verde and in Guinea, it is always the colonialists who profit most of the less. Because in Cape Verde, for example, there is no commercial enterprise which is not tied to an enterprise in Portugal. Likewise in Guinea, the monopoly of all of our trade, not ours, their trade, belong to Gouvet and Ultramarina, tied to the banks, all Portuguese. But we must tell the truth. Many of the Cape Verdean people suffered because of exploitation by landowners, themselves Cape Verdeans. Similarly in Guinea, part of the great suffering of our people was at the hands of our own folk. We must not all forget this so that we shall know what to do in the future. So, this brings up the question of what exploitation is, and whether, you owning land is also you exploiting people for living on your land, right? This, therefore, is a specific reality. In Cape Verde, our population endured wretchedness. In years of heavy raining, there is abundance. One eats well, fills the belly, and can even stretch out and relax a little. But for the most of the time, when there are insufficient rains, there is famine. During the last 50 years, many people have died from starvation in Cape Verde than the population today. Others were contracted for estome and transported like animals in the holes. Those who died were thrown into the sea. Some were sent to Angola. In Guinea, as you know, the whole range of colonial exploitation existed. Forced labor on the roads, all kinds of outrages, abuses, humiliation, and the Portuguese doctor who studied the situation in Cape Verde said that they came away with uncertainty, certainty in their scientific opinion that the whole population shows symptoms of malnutrition. If it was not a question of total starvation, it was a case of specific starvation, meaning a lack of certain elements which are essential to the well-being of the human body. Specific starvation also existed in Guinea. In Guinea, nearly everyone has malaria. If we are now to make tests on all the comrades present here, we would find that nearly all have intestinal worms. This is a widespread leprosy, disease of all kinds. Can you imagine that? So this is like the reality of the world. These are people struggling, and most of them have malnutrition. Most of them have intestinal worms. Most of them have widespread leprosy. I don't know what leprosy is, but that's like a freaking biblical disease. Most of them are have malnutrition. Like that's, when we talk about how rough we have it today, like right now I'm sitting here, kind of full, low-key, right? And it's like, for what? And this is why it's so critical, so fundamental for us to get out and struggle, or not struggle. Sorry, I don't like to use that word. It just happened from the reading, but I think this is a pretty important. I think that's a pretty important section right there. All right, so let's see. Social disasters for our people, which make us a weak people from the scientific and sanitary point of view. A man who lives almost exclusively on rice cannot have the same resistance as a man who eats rice, meat, milk, eggs, etc. It is true that when a foreigner comes to our land and goes marching with our comrades in the bush, he lags behind. That is something else. But from the point of view of fitness, we know that a person in our land who is aged 30 has already begun to age. In our land, it is unusual to come across old men with beard and white hair. The average lifespan in our land of Guinea and Cape Verde is 30 years. Can you imagine that? Our life expectancy is 30 years. Anyone who lives beyond the 30s is lucky. Now, life expectancy in other lands where one eats well, drinks well, I do not mean getting drunk as one should, is 60 and 67 years, and each year grows higher. On any count, it is more agreeable. If someone is born with the certainty that he is going to live for 70 years, he has time to make something of it. But What can one do in 30 years? The difference is due to inadequate diet, hygiene, and healthcare, and to wretched living conditions. That is the social condition of our land. Abuses by the Portuguese, abuses by some sons of our land who misuse others, wretchedness, disease, famine, and on the top of all this, a short lifespan, a difficult situation, very difficult. That's actually sad, because like I think to myself, I just want to say this, I think to myself, you know, I want to help people on the continent. And the reality is this, I can't help everybody. But like some of the people you don't help, some of the people you choose not to help, you know, for whatever reason. Like let's say you're in a committed relationship, you're building up your own family, whatever, right? They may just die at 30. You know? Anyway. I mean, it's just a little sad, you know? Not a little sad, it's pretty sad. But it is what it is. I mean, I'm pretty much talking to myself because because they say I have like 0 viewers. Well, they have 1, which is cool. Shout out. But cultural reality. From the cultural point of view, it is true that conditions in Cape Verde are a shade better than in Guinea. Given the conditions under which the population developed, the question of being or not being an indigenous inhabitant never arose. So in theory, any Cape Verdean child can go to school, the official school. It is no less true than overall there are far fewer schools than in Guinea. There are some things you do not know and which might mislead you. It is true that in Cape Verde, more folk learn to read and write than in Guinea under the colonial system. But the level of literacy in Cape Verde, contrary to the boast of any Cape Verdean who thinks he knows it all, is 85%. The Portuguese like to boast that in Cape Verde there was no illiterates. This is a lie. When I went there for holiday in 1949, I made some tests of those who could read. There were folk who had gained primary school certificates some 4 or 5 years before in the bush, in Godim or in the Santa Catarina, for example, to whom I would give the newspaper to read, but they did not know what they were reading. There are some illiterates who can pick out the letters. There are many such folk in the world, even some doctors, but we must shed many illusions. In Guinea, 99% of the population could not go to school. Schooling was exclusively for the assimilated, the children of the assimilated. You know the whole story. I am not going to tell it again, but it was a disaster that the Portuguese caused in our land by not allowing our children to advance, to learn, to understand the reality of our life, our life, our land, our society, to understand the reality of Africa and the modern world. Now, I just want to say this, like, again, you know, we talk about what entitlement is, right? And not to say that, like, we have to understand the Portuguese were a force that came to Africa to take its resources. That's it. They were not supposed to give your children, you know, advancements. They are not your friends. And that's one of the fundamental realities that you should communicate, is that these other people are here we're there for a purpose. You know, they're there for a purpose. And that's what it is. Like, that's what we have to get. We have to understand intention. That's what it is, intention. And don't fall for rhetoric. Rhetoric is the most dangerous thing if you cannot analyze intention. And that goes back to, like I said, I wrote a book, for those who don't know, Book of Power. We have inside of there the speeches, some fragments of the speeches of Dessalines. Dessalines is going to tell you, he's going to tell you, hey, look, we would have won earlier if not for the nice words of France. Okay? Like, do not get caught up with the nice words. I'm just going to say that. All right. Our understanding the reality of Africa and the modern world. This is our great obstacle, an enormous difficulty for the development of our struggle. Only today I told you that Fula people migrated across Africa, as did the Mandanga people, as it happens, though many of you did not know, nor do many comrades. A Befada, who is called Malam something or other, for example, does not know that in ancient times Malam, Barima, and such like were not Befada names. And what happened with the Befada happened to many folk of our land. Take, for example, Vasco Salvador Correia. Formerly his folk would not be called Vasco nor Salvador, still less Correia. It means that the Mandinga and dominating the peoples of our land practiced assimilation. The Portuguese were not the first to want to assimilate in our land, and so the dominated began to adopt Mandinga names. Likewise, the Mandinga of today did not have the same names in that epoch. The ancient names of the Fula were not Mamadu or anything of the sort. All this is borrowed from Arabic. Mamadu means Muhammad. Iosefe means Joseph. Mariama is Mary, Semitic names. The cultural reality of our land in Cape Verde, raising now the question of the colonialists who did not allow us much advance, is a consequence of the fact that the colonialists allowed Cape Verdeans to study to the extent that they needed to train folk as agents of colonialism, as they had used Indians. Just as the British used Indians in colonization and the French used Dahomeans, so the Dahome, y'all see that? So too the Portuguese too used Cape Verdeans by teaching a certain proportion, but at a certain stage they closed the path once and for all. No more than a certain number of primary schools, no more than one secondary school, which moreover Vieira Machado, the then Minister of Overseas, wanted to change into a training center for fishermen and carpenters. Just when I was about to begin secondary school, I made it 3 months without going to class at secondary school because they had closed it. For them, they had done was enough. What they had done was enough. No more was needed. From then on, only training centers for fishermen and carpenters. The population rose and protested, and the secondary school began operating once more. So the people protested that they weren't being taught, miseducated, pretty much. Which is fine. Like, again, like, what do you expect? You know? What do you expect? But it is, like, again, I'm just trying to, I'm looking at this situation, I'm saying to myself, okay, what do I need to do? Like, how can we, like, what can I do? And I want you to listen, like you listening, say, what can I do in this situation? You know, like, what can I do for our people today? Because I'm not going to say that our lifespan is 30 years old. I don't know. I really don't know. Or life expectancy. You don't know the life expectancy of any individual, like off rip, except for at their funeral, I guess, right? You know, or post-mortem. But you want to, like, I hope you want to extend it too. But anyway, let's get back to the reading. But now the reality of our own cultural situation in Cape Verde is the following. It is a transfer of African culturality to the islands. Then came contact between the African cultures with other cultures from outside, from Portugal and elsewhere. Many folk think of Cape Verde as Praia or as Vicente, but anyone who knows the bush in Cape Verde feels in Cape Verde an African reality as palpable as any other fragment of Africa. The culture of the Cape Verdean people is quintessentially African. Its belief it is identical. In Santiago, there is a pollen which some still regard as a sacred tree. The pollen is not common because of the many droughts, but those which still exist are sacrosanct. There is moreover a morundade sorcery, spirits which walk at night, flying creatures who make up an interpretation of one's reality, which almost totally matches that in Africa, not to speak of the casting of spells. Cape Verde was a melting pot of various ethnic groups, and there was a fusion of their cultures, but until the 1940s, for example, some distinct groups retained some of their own characteristics. For instance, groups who were settled around Praia and Santiago retained the word tabanca for the village, and their festivals were of a given kind, while elsewhere in Anchada Santo Antonio, for example, the village was of another type and different. Again, for the folk of Santa Catarina, Picos, etc. In Guinea, the culture of our people is the product of many African cultures. Each ethnic group has its own culture, but they all share a common base in their worldview and their relation to society. And so you see the how he's like, hey, look, everybody has different ethnic groups, but they all kind of have a similarity. And we know that although there are Muslim populations, at bottom there are also animists. No, at bottom they are also animists, like the Balanta and others. They believe in Allah, but also believe in the Imram spirit and the sorcerer. They have the Quran, but an amulet on their arm and other things. And the success of Islam in our land, as in Africa in general, is that Islam is able to understand this, to tolerate the culture of others, whereby the Catholics want to put a quick finish to all this and have only belief in the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Fatima, and in God and our Lord Jesus Christ. Our Lord Jesus Christ. Yeah. So he's like, look, the Muslims are pretty tolerant of animist beliefs, if you will, right? Which is interesting. This is the cultural reality of our land. Wait, give me 2 seconds. I just want to take a snapshot. This is the cultural reality of our land, but we must consider our culture carefully. It is difficult. It is dictated by our economic condition, by our situation of economic underdevelopment. We must enjoy our African culture. We must cherish it, our dances, our songs, our style of making statues, canoes, our cloths. All this is magnificent, but if we rely only on our cloths to clothe all our folk, we are wrong. We have to be realists. Our land is very beautiful, but if we do not struggle to change our land, we are wrong. There are many folk who think that being African is being able to sit on the ground and eat with one's hands. Yes, that's certainly African, but all the people of the world have gone through the stage of sitting on the ground and eating with one's hands. And this is like, oh my gosh, like, I should frame this. Because that's another thing that we have where we're just like, oh, this is what it means to be African. And it's like when you begin to read more or when you begin to study the world more, you realize that like you're really talking about an economic stage. So here he's saying, sitting on the Vikings did that shit. Sat on the floor and ate with their hands. You know what I mean? Like what are you fucking talking about? Obviously the Vikings were pretty unhygienic as well, and so you'll have different cultures everywhere. But it's like you can't just cherish like sometimes we do that. We just idealize something. Say this is what our elders used to do. This is what our ancestors used to do, and it's like, yeah, but. We have a situation right here. Actually, look at that. I think he actually jumps ahead and says Vikings. Yo, Cabral, brother from another mother, right? All right. Anyway, so yes, this is certainly African, but all the people of the world have gone through the stages of sitting on the ground and eating with one's hands. There are many folk who think that it's only Africans who eat with their hands. No, all the Arabs in North Africa do it. But even before there were Africans, before they came to Africa, but even before they were Africans, I think he's talking about the Arabs, which is like, okay. Before they came to Africa, they came from the east to Africa. They used to eat with their hands and sit on the ground. We must be aware of our things. We must respect those things of value, which are useful for the future of our land, for the advancement of our people. No one should think that he is more African than another, even than some white man who defends the interests of Africa, merely because he is today more adept at eating with his hand, rolling rice into a ball, and pulling it into his mouth. Hold on a second. No one thinks that he is more African even than some white man who defends the interests of Africa. I don't know what he's talking about, but I'll just skip over that. The Portuguese, when they were still Visigoths, or the Swedish, who give us aid today, when they were still Vikings, could also eat with their hands, right? If you see films about the Vikings of olden days, you can see them with great horns on their heads and amulets on their arms, setting off for war. Horns on their heads, amulets on their arms, setting off for war. And they would not set off for war without their great horn on their head. No one should think that to be African, one must wear horns on their head, on our chest, and an amulet round one's waist. Such persons are individuals who have not yet properly understood the relationship between man and nature. The Portuguese did the same. The French did it when they were Franks, Normans. The English did it when they were Anglos and Saxons, voyaging across the sea in canoes, great canoes, like that of the Bijagos. We must have the courage to state this clearly. No one should think that the culture of Africa, what is really African, and so must be preserved for all time for us to be African, is our weakness in the face of nature. Okay, so he's like, that's your weakness in the face of nature. Any people in the world of whatever status has gone through the stage of these weaknesses or has to go through them. There are folk who have not reached it. They spend their lives climbing trees, eating and sleeping, nothing more yet. And then what myths they still believe. We should not persuade ourselves that to be African is believing that lightning is the fury of the deity, God is feeling angry. We cannot believe that to be African is to think that man has no mastery of the flooding of rivers. Anyone who leads a struggle like ours, who bears responsibility in a struggle like ours, has to understand gradually what concrete reality is. Damn, Daniel! I feel like I want to read this separately just for the sake of, a TikTok video. So I'm going to make a note of that. What page is this? This is page 57. So I'm just going to say, read page 57 for TikTok or something. I'm going to put in the chat because, the chat should be good for something, right? I'm just about to read page 57 for TikTok. Let's go. So we're just writing it down. We're just typing. Anyway, this is the cost of reading. The cost of reading is reading is pleasurable. I don't know if you guys realize it. It's pretty pleasurable. You just learn stuff, and the cool thing is that this is an ancestor who was in closer proximity to that to the colonial period. In fact, not just closer proximity to the colonial period, he was in the colonial period, and he's like, look, fuck that shit. No, we're not gonna believe in the lightning god or something, no, that's not it. I like that. Props to him. Amilcar Cabral, remember his name. All right, so our struggle is based on our culture, because culture is the fruit of history and it is a strength, but our culture is filled with weakness in the face of nature. It is essential to know this, and we can point out further, for example, that certain of our dances represents relationship of man to the forest. Folk appear clothed in straw in the shape of birds, and others like great birds with a huge beak, and folk run in fear. We can do many such dances, but we have to go beyond this. We cannot merely stop there. We can preserve the memory of all these things and develop our art and our culture while we display it to others. But as we have already gone beyond this, we know that it is we who rule in the forest, in the bush, we human beings, and not any animal or spirit lurking there. This is very important, but this is the cultural reality of our land. Various comrades who are sitting here have an amulet at their waist, in the belief that this will allow them to escape Portuguese bullets. But not one of you can say to me that not one of the comrades who have already died in our struggle had an amulet at his waist. They all had them. It is just that in our struggle, we have to respect this. We have to respect this because we start out from reality. We cannot in the least order the comrade to tear off the amulet, or we would be treating our comrades as the Germans would. Many years ago, the Germans would not go to war without an amulet. Even today, there are some who carry an icon of Our Lady of Fatima inside a small book. It is their amulet. The Bible is their amulet, and before beginning battles, they cross themselves. The Portuguese come along with a great cross on their chest, and at the moment of beginning of the battle, they kiss it. It is their amulet, and there are still some who believe in our amulet. So he's like, look, we believe in amulets, they believe in amulets. It's not that unique. It's not that scientific. It doesn't even work. But we understand your desire to use an amulet, right? Because we already see that even our enemies use amulets. And that's pretty respectful. That's pretty respectful. So this is a question of our cultural level in relation to the specific reality of war. We accept it, but no one should think that the leadership of the struggle believes that if we wear an amulet at the waist, we shall not die. We shall not die in the war if we do not wage the war, or if we do not attack from a position of weakness. If we make mistakes, if we are in a position of weakness, we shall die for sure. There's no getting away from it. You can tell me a whole series of tales you have in your head. Cabral doesn't know. We have seen occasions when it was the amulet which spared the comrade from... you can make up a bunch of bullshit. Death. The bullets were coming and turned back in a ricochet. You can tell me this, but I live in hopes that the children of our children, when they hear of this, they will be happy that PAIGC was able to wage a struggle in accordance with the reality of their land. But they will have to say, our fathers fought hard, but they had some funny ideas. This discussion may be premature. I am talking about the future, but I feel sure that the majority understand what I'm saying and that I am right. Yes! You see, and the thing is this, that's true! We look back and we say, oh, look, these Africans, they won these wars, but they had Maji water. They believed that there was a water that made them immune to bullets. I like this. I like it. I like it. I like it. This is brilliant. So let's keep going. The amulet is characteristic of Africa. Even lawyers I know in other African countries go about decked with their amulets at the waist, and when they are going to plead cases at court, put on a big amulet. Never know when I might win with this. Even some comrades from other Portuguese colonies, because our struggle was making good progress, tend to ask us if there were some lucky charms which we could send them to. I merely call the comrades' attention to the fact that they could see this as a strength and as a weakness. It is a strength because a comrade who puts on his amulet believes in something other than the words of the party, and we cannot overlook that he feels more courageous. It is a weakness because his trustfulness, he could make many mistakes. Now, I looked back at the older text just to emphasize something. He said, look, you will surely die if you attack from a position of weakness. So if we make mistakes or from a position of weakness. So he says, we do not attack if we do not attack from a position of weakness. So the main thing is do not attack from positions of weakness. That's the main lesson there. And I like that he's explaining that. So sorry. Let's go back. So there were cases of comrades dying in the following way. An aircraft arrives, everyone dives to the ground. The aircraft bombards, but nothing happens. Suddenly a comrade remembers that he does not have his amulet with him. He stands up, runs to his hut, and grabs the amulet. On his return, he is machine gunned and dies with the amulet in his hand. Perhaps some of you know of the similar cases, but how many of you can think this? What foolishness is this? How can it be? You see what I'm saying? So he's like, look, you could survive and then say to yourself, oh, you know what? I might need that's what happened to me. In fact, before I went to Africa, my son's mother was like, please, if you're going to go, please take this stone with you. Like a quartz or something like that. I don't know what stone it was, but please take this traveling stone. It's for good safety. And I was like, the fuck I won't. Now maybe Cabral would be like, sure, I'll do this, But I was like, ain't no way, boy. I'm not gonna say how I don't know. I can't tell you. But like, yeah, no. Toss it. Don't believe in no bullshit. Cause like imagine if I was like, oh no, like I'm running away, I got some trouble. And then like for instance, y'all know some lady tried to attack me, let's say, right? I know you're like, wait, what? Oh, you actually have an interesting life? Okay. If I was like, oh, you know what? I'm gonna walk outside and grab this quartz first, right? I would have been in trouble. But instead I was like, you know what? Let me stay inside while you yell outside. You know what I'm saying? That's it. Like you don't want this thing to impact your mind, your thinking. What you want to impact your thinking is the reality. Not, oh, I'm going to be safe because I have a fucking crystal. Or I'm going to be safe because I have an amulet. It's, I'm going to be safe because I'm not in a position of weakness. Okay? That's what it is. Let's keep going. The fact of the matter is that our struggle has its strong face and its weak face. Many of us believe that we should not install ourselves in certain bush areas because they belong to the Iram spirit. But today, thanks to many Iram spirits of our land, our folk understood, and even the Iram understood, that the bush belongs to man and no one is afraid of the bush anymore. We are even well established in the Kobiana bush, the more so because the Iram spirit is a nationalist. It's said openly that the Portuguese had to go away, had to no right to be in our land, right? So he's also saying that, sometimes we would go like, oh, we can't be in this bush. And I guess they just changed it to be like, oh, well, actually, they're on our side. So it is what it is. But you must understand that all of this is an obstacle to the struggle. At one time, many comrades who had taken up this life and were solid, my comrades who I'd hold in high regard and who had spent a long time with me, if they were told by me, go into the interior, stick tight to the work of mobilizing the people, and Sekuna Bao and some other soothsayer told them, do not go. I have cast your fortune and seen great harm for you if you go into the interior. Perhaps they would kill themselves because they were ashamed of facing Cabral, but they would not go. They were comrades who did not make ambushes just because a soothsayer told them they should not make ambushes as one of them was going to die. And the comrades used to be so accustomed to the elders giving them orders, making decisions for them about the war, that later it was the elders who came to complain. Cabral, what is happening? The youngsters don't obey us anymore. They go into attacking without consulting us. I answered, Elder, look at it this way. Once upon a time, the youngster would not attack without consulting you. I never said anything to them about it. So today I'm not saying anything to them, but I never appointed you as commander. They are the commanders. If in the past they consulted you, that is their business. Now they don't want to do any more. That's none of my business. The elder was a little angry, but he is not stupid. He is cunning. When all is said and done, the elders were the intellectuals of our society, of our genuine, real society. They were the ones who saw things clearly, who understood everything, our strengths and our weakness, and they soon shifted their ground, adapted themselves to the new situation. So he's saying, look, the elders thought they were commanders of the war. And I mean, look, that's good and bad. I'm not going to hold you. It's good and bad, but, it's good and bad. I'm okay with elders thinking that they're commanders, because they're the elders of the community. Either way, though, I'm also okay with, the youngsters guiding their own war because, you don't know whose side the elders are on, honestly. So on the cultural plane, our party has tried to derive the best possible results. Well, you see, the soothsayer thing was kind of like, what are you talking about? But anyway, on the cultural plane, our party has tried to derive the best possible result, the best possible benefit from our cultural reality. It does so by not banning what is possible not to ban without prejudicing the struggle, or by creating new ideas in the comrade spirit, new ways of seeing reality, and further by making the best possible use of those who already have a little more education, both to lead the struggle itself and to be sent to study how to trade cadres for the future. All this might seem very simple, but is difficult. It is very complex to find the right answer for this. So now we go to the political reality. Okay, so the political reality of our land is the greater reality that I feel like he already did political reality. I feel like he already did political. No, it's geographic reality. No, I think it was political reality. But anyway, let's keep going. The political reality of our land is that the greater reality that we all know well is that the fact that we are a Portuguese colony. Yeah, I feel like I already read this. No, I couldn't have because I didn't read this part before. And it's the same page. So, but anyway, is that we are a Portuguese colony. Our people could rule themselves neither in Guinea nor in Cape Verde. The Portuguese ruled even if they might appoint a black administrator, as only Honorario Barreto had the honor of disgrace of being. And the truth was that the Portuguese ruled in our land. Portuguese colonialism, and it was their greater reality that created the conflict between us and the Portuguese, exploitation of our people under cover of Portugal's policy. This basically is what generated our struggle. Our struggle grew so much that we must take advantage of it to transform even geographical reality to the extent that we can. It would seem improbable, but it is the truth. For when we build dams, bridges, etc., we shall change the geographical landscape of our land. We are going to make a new human geography that we are creating in our land. When we completely transform the islets of Bijagos, when we make Cape Verde into a magnificent center for world tourism, for example, this will already be a new geographic reality that we are creating. The ships which now pass by far out to sea will begin to stop there. But we must, through this struggle, transform the economic reality of our land. Let us put an end to exploitation by the Portuguese, but let us put an end to exploitation of our people by our own folk. And we must develop our land, make it progress as much as possible. This is what our struggle means. Social reality, cultural reality, everything is going to change. And already a new political reality has arisen in our land. And as the following, we are ruling ourselves. Obviously, our reality has strengths and weakness, as I have already shown you. For example, the fact that we do not have great economic development is a serious weakness, but is also strength. For in our land has important mines, important factories, the imperialists would have come into the war more quickly and in greater strength. Perhaps we should have had to fight not only against the Portuguese, but against other imperialists as well. As it is, at least we have a quieter life, just bush and desert. So you see, that's what I was saying. And it's pretty interesting that he would say that even though before he was saying something else. It's just pretty interesting because it's the same paragraph. It's the same chapter. But all right, let's go. But we cannot let ourselves sleep. Obviously, the social reality of our land, where, for example, there are no grand bourgeoisie, no great capitalists, is helpful for our struggle because we do not have the difficulty of having to fight those who have super exploited our folk. But it's also a weakness because in some lands, some local capitalists adhere strongly to the struggle with all the resources, with all their money, etc., and gave significant help, as in Cuba and China and in other countries where many local capitalists took the revolution seriously, and some leaders are the sons of great capitalists. So he's saying sometimes the local capitalists are actually helpful to the struggle. So I don't know if he's talking about Mao. I don't know what Mao's father did. I don't know if he was a great capitalist, but I think in Cuba, Castro or Che, they might have been descended from capitalists. Obviously, Marx himself was petty bourgeoisie, and Engels, his writing partner, was a capitalist. Right. But anyway, let's keep going. Another advantage is that our land does not have great class differences, very wide differences, and that is better off classes who have most resources are smaller in number, very few persons. This avoids many difficulties of division on social grounds for us. But in the social reality of our land, as we talked about this yesterday, there is a question of ethnic groups and of great weakness. For this very realm there will be folk capable of thinking, I am Pepo, I am Mancana, I am Manaka, but does not fail his companion. I am Mandinga. This is a great weakness of our struggle, and it would be very damaging if in fact we let it go on, and if in fact we were not able to eliminate all this in the path of our struggle. I want to call your attention to the factor which you should consider carefully to see what is happening in Africa, or questions of tribes, the so-called tribalism, wars between ethnic groups. It is not the people who invent all this. The people do not heed it because The people pursue reality with great realism, defend their own interests. The truth is the following. The era of tribes in Africa has already passed. There was an era in which the tribes struggled against each other because of land, to take land, to graze their cattle, etc., to find better soils, or to because of their children, their wives, to test their own strength. But this is over and done with. So he's like, look, tribalism's over. I wish he told this to Nigeria, right? I wonder if I could highlight stuff. Let me see. Can you highlight things? No, it doesn't highlight. Okay. Wait, let me see. I could probably do this one. No, I can't highlight. It sucks. Yeah, you can't highlight. Okay. Yeah, you can't highlight. All right. So anyway, so I like that. So anyway, so as soon as our African people succeeded in forming states, even states of the military type, as soon as the African people succeeded in bringing together folk from different tribes for one task to serve one class, the tribes had begun to disappear. When the Portuguese and other colonists came, they did away with it once and for all, except they tried to preserve the superstructure, meaning those who were ruling the tribes or the groups, so that these were served as intermediaries to help the colonies to rule. Our people today, Oinka or Balanta or some others, may retain ancient memories. We at the Mandinga, let me actually write that down, page 61. 61, tribalism is over. I'm just going to take notes, and maybe I might make a... sometimes it's good to have people read, When the Portuguese and other colonialists came, they did away with it once and for all, except they tried to preserve the superstructure, meaning that they were ruling the tribes or the groups so that those served as intermediaries to help the colonists to rule. Our people today, Oinka or Balanta or some other, may retain ancient memories. We and the Mandinga did not get on very well, in fact. But if there were no one to incite them, they would no longer go this way. The same happens with Igbo and Yoruba, Nigeria, Bakongo, and other groups in Congo. It takes someone to incite them, someone who says, let's start something. They've got big ideas, but the Mandinga will show them. Some folk even despise their tribes, folks who no longer even want to know about this. They have studied in universities in Lisbon or Oxford or even in the capital city of their own lands. Today, because Africa has acceded to independence, they want to rule. They want to be president of the republic. They want to be minister, so they can exploit their own people. So when they want to be minister, so when, for some reason, this is denied them, they remember their tribe. I am Lunda, born of Lunda, descendant of the Lunda king. Lunda people, rise, because if Bakongo want to eat us, what has nothing to do with Lunda or Bakongo, it is wanting to be president, or to have all the diamonds, all the gold, all those fine things in one's hand, and to do as one pleases, to live well, to have all the women one wants in Africa or in Europe. It is for the sake of touring Europe, being received as presidents, wearing expensive clothes, a mourning coat, or even great boo-boos to pretend that they are Africans. All lies. They are not Africans at all. They are lackeys or lapdogs of whites. What happens in Nigeria also happens among us, at least shows among us. Namely, some folks want to serve only their own political ambition. It means that we must recognize that only ambition can defend divisiveness, whatever the ground of division might be. The Portuguese, for example, have done much harm to us, but we cannot lump all whites together as Portuguese. Only some overly ambitious fellow would be able to say, we cannot accept the help of so-and-so in Bissau who is white, or so-and-so in Cairo who is white. How? This is no good. If we want to serve our land, our party, our people, we must accept everyone's help. But as a friend, as a companion in struggle, someone who is looking after his own belly, a good job for himself might think, whether he is clever or stupid, perhaps we could accept him, but to walk over him, otherwise it is best for him to clear off, or he might take my place from me. That is not correct. So you guys might see what he was just saying right there. He's like, hey, look, we can accept white people's help too, right? And that is, I think that's one of the fundamental misunderstandings in Africa. But I mean, again, we have to look at the context too. And I mean, and it's not just that we have to look at the context. We also have to look at our context. So we in America would say, you got to be race conscious. You got to be against white people. You got to be against white people. But then we in America have every population, like almost every population on the planet, really, like we are really dependent on white people, you know, like to an extreme degree. So it's kind of like, you know, do as I say, not as I do, you know. In Africa, they're saying, hey, look, there might be a handful of anti-imperialist whites. And if you're being realistic, there's a lot, like, if there is a white person who's anti-imperialist or there's a white person who's only after money, you probably can use them. You know what I mean? Just like a black person can use a white person can use a black person, a black person can use a white person. You know, this down the line, you know, like, fuck all these white people. You can't, they're all bad. They're terrible, right? I get it. But the trouble or the issue is that the people saying that, for the most part, are like completely like even if you look at like what website are we on? You know what I mean? Who made this ebook? You know, even the fact that this book was written, it was written by Basil Davidson. If you guys don't know who Basil Davidson is, he's a white historian on Africa. You know, it's almost like, it's pretty ridiculous. I'm not gonna hold you. But I get it. But it's like, it's a do as I say, not as I do kind of phenomenon, which is ironically the joke that people make about Americans. So it is only suitable that it's actually applies to you know, the Americans of a darker hue. So let's keep going. So this is why we need to know the reality of our land, reality in all aspects of all kinds, so that we shall be able to guide the struggle in general and in particular. We have to recognize that in the specific circumstance of reality in our land of Guinea and Cape Verde, much courage is required to answer with confidence this question: can we in fact wage a war like this? Obviously, we can say yes because we are doing it, but at the start it was difficult. There was a man who asked, but how are we going to struggle against the Portuguese if we do not even have clothing, if we cannot read or write? The Portuguese warfare is made by commanders, majors, etc., trained at university or at serious academies. How are we going to struggle against them? We don't have anything. Where are we going to find material for struggle? How can this be? We have to do some straight thinking so as to answer yes, we can. We have to place our reality in the reality of the modern world. We can say we're all divided, each group isolated, but in the reality of the modern world, many folk can bring our people to the understanding that we can be united. Balanta, Pepo, Badinga, descendants of Cape Verdeans, etc. We can go forward together without panicking, and we have shown this is really possible. In the reality of the modern world, a new Africa has risen to independence, to progress. They must count on it. There is a socialist camp which has grown from the October Revolution, which placed the following assertions before everything: self-determination for all people. Each people must choose their destiny, take it to their own hands. There are, moreover, international laws established in the United Nations. So again, you know, this is why I'm not really too mad at socialists or socialism, particularly in this era. They're talking about self-determination. They're talking about choosing your own destiny. Now, the trouble is that we also believe in the international laws of the United Nations, which is essentially, this is the false dichotomy, you know? This is, you know, like thinking these two, it's just complicated. So you must bear all this in mind. In reality of the whole world, the world wars there were, with all the difficulties they brought, so that we should have the courage to prosecute the struggle in our land. For if we were to limit ourselves to the isolated realities within our village, it would be impossible to imagine how we should go and struggle against colonialism. You see, therefore, the importance of knowing our reality and of knowing also all the realities. It is for us to know where ours is among the others, for us to see the actual situation. We should struggle. We could wage our own struggle, could make many sacrifices, but it would not be enough to wage the struggle from our own resources. It could not be enough. What was essential was that our party should be able to take advantage of our favorable conditions in the world and in Africa for us to take our struggle forward. And we did take advantage, and we are constantly taking more advantage. So we were able to have weapons, ammunition, clothing, medicines, hospitals, etc., and that we could not have in our land. We asked for ourselves the sacrifice and the effort that we could give, but we counted also on the reality of the modern world, on strengths which might come from outside. This is the significance that aid from our country or has for our struggle. Aid for us has the only one condition, that the unconditional. We guarantee that all the aid we receive is put to the service of our party and our people. We must say that no liberation movement in the world has made better use of aid given to it than our party. We all are familiar with the admiration we arouse in all those who see our achievement outside and inside our land, and who see that we have in fact put everything we receive to the service of our struggle, to the service of our people. We have tried to use it in the party's service, the skills of our comrades. If we did not give everything that can, it is because they are unwilling. There is no lack of example or lack of encouragement. We have tried constantly to raise standards, making direct use of the help we receive in the trading cadres. So we have the need to use our own experience, but our strength, our own sacrifice and effort to transform our reality. But we need as well to know the experience of others and to have the help of others and to use this help correctly. Let me ask you to see how much. Oh, okay, we're almost finished. Okay. I'm like, yeah, how long is this? Use this correctly. So wait, I didn't even get to the ethnic part. He was supposed to talk about the ethnic reality, and I guess he's not going to. But anyway, so let's just finish this. Through the marrying of our strengths with the strength that might come from outside, we can effectively transform the reality of our land. We have already changed a great deal, because today in our land, in the greater part of our land, the Portuguese do not rule. In Guinea, the Portuguese are squeezed in a colonial war they know is lost. In Cape Verde, where matters are already on the boil, they are harassed to the point of calling on their friends to come to the rescue. The loss of Cape Verde for them means the end of Portuguese domination in Africa. We know, therefore, that we are able to transform this reality. The mere fact of holding this meeting is further clear evidence of the new reality of our land. It is a land we used to know. In the reality, Cruz Pinto left where he went to study in Portugal, or Bobo left when he went to study politics. A meeting of comrades like this one was not possible, whether inside or outside our land. Once upon a time in Bissau, I called the closest of my household and said to them, "Comrades, you are close friends of my mother. You are my friends too. You come to my house, we eat, we joke, but the time for joking is ended. Let us start a little discussion." They replied, "Yes, surely." We discussed, we arranged a meeting, but only one or two came. The others did not come because they thought this was madness. If we compare the moment with the moment today, we can see in fact that the creation of PIJC was the point of departure for creating a new reality in our land of Guinea and Cape Verde. We must go on creating and developing it more and more each day so that we can serve not only and principally the interests of our people, but also the interests of Africa and the progress of mankind. So I just want to end, we're going to end here obviously, but I want to just touch on to this idea that he says that originally he met with his friends, close friends, and he said, look, let's talk for real. And this is again, Amilcar Cabral, brilliant, educated man. And when he gets the meeting together, one or two people came. And that's what was the jumping point for the liberation of his country. And not just his country, of two countries. Just one or two people. So I want you to take that wisdom with you as you decide what you want moving forward and into the future for our people, And I think I might just make a note of that. And if anybody has any questions, now is the time to make some. Now's the time to share your observation. But beyond that, let me see what page this was, page 64. I'll just make a note and then we can just head out. And of course, I appreciate everybody for coming through. I do need more watched hours, just for in case somebody wanted to help out. So that's a thing that I kind of wanted to do. But of course, I kind of go for topics that are interesting, 64, but maybe not necessarily universally interesting. So I appreciate everybody for coming through and joining me in this reading. Liberation of Guinea, of two countries, it's not about how many you have. It's really about, it's not really about how many you have. It's really about just having a vision and being able to articulate it and really putting forward the work. So I see there's no comments, but I appreciate everybody who came through. I only see Brother Bakari, but it says that there were 4 people. So shout out to the 4 who were here. But other than that, Shamim Hotep, Anku Ja Seneb Neb, Amen Ma'at, Dua Necher.